I cannot teach anybody anything. I can only make them think, said Socrates, or at least some people claim that he might have said such a thing. But it's an interesting idea, isn't it? Especially if we understand thinking in a sufficiently rich way. It might imply that the job of the teacher is really to create a space where something like thinking can happen. What kinds of spaces do we provide for our students? I mean, times have changed, haven't they? We live in a much more diverse and colourful world, you might say. Maybe. Maybe the world has always been diverse, we're just more aware of it. But we certainly have so much more media and access to media these days, and that means we have a lot more ways of being literate. But has the dynamic of classrooms really changed that much? And what would an ideal dynamic be like? Now, in this presentation, I'm not going to try and answer such big questions. There's so much that needs to be unpacked and explained, for one thing. But I am going to push for a way of designing lessons that capitalises on the meaning-making resources of language, and also our human inclination to enjoy designing things. Now, to make this all a bit more concrete, I thought I'd treat you to an actual lesson I once saw. And as you can see, it's going to be a physical geography lesson. I think the grade was around 3rd or 4th grade. I'm going to call it a killer lesson. Alright, now we're familiar with these kinds of maps, right? They show major roads and cities as well as some physical terrain. And in this example, physical features are even more the focus. So this is called a topographical map. And in this lesson, the students were going to be introduced to it as part of exploring the physical geography of Wisconsin. In fact, the teacher wanted them to be introduced to a lot of things. So let me show you what the teacher had planned. No stone was left unturned. She had the objectives. She even thought about how the lesson was going to be introduced. Introduce landforms by showing a topographical map of Wisconsin and asking, does anyone know what this type of map tells us? And what to do afterwards. She cared a lot about multiple intelligences and knew that attention to language was important. And so the lesson began, with students being treated to a set of images on the overhead screen, like this one, and this one. The students were all given a little stapled booklet containing the same images as they were seeing on the screen, but they had like lines for writing the definition of a particular topographic feature. And so it went on. The teacher tried her best to engage the children by asking at each picture whether any of them had seen or experienced something like it. She quizzed them as to what it was and where it might be found. And so it went on. And on. And on. But what interest and enthusiasm the children may have had at the beginning of the lesson, well, it was starting to wane. Writing the formal definitions was not working for a lot of the class. Either they didn't have enough time, or they didn't have the linguistic resources, or they were lost, or they lost interest. And here are the rest of the topographical features the teachers covered. The children may have enjoyed the images, but they were fast losing interest in the lesson itself. Yeah, so I said, I'm going to call this a killer lesson. It certainly was. She'd created a graveyard. It was very ordered, very structured, you might say. But it gave the students little opportunity to show that they can think and be creative. That children can even be ingenious. Like them, as I was watching it, my interest was piqued at the beginning of the lesson, and it wouldn't have been so bad if this lesson was understood as merely an introduction to something challenging. But it was the same thing, repeated and repeated and repeated, and it wasn't clear what the use of all this was going to be. Frankly, it felt oppressive. The children weren't expected to do anything with all this information except write it down. Apparently that's an important thing to do in school, isn't it? It made you want to give up and check out. What a pity. The challenge of representing the topographical features of the Earth's surface, think about that. That's an interesting challenge, isn't it? I mean, the idea of creating a typology of topographical features that allow us to name and identify natural qualities of our environment. Wouldn't that be cool? But this was lost. So, okay, what can we do to redeem this lesson? What can we do to help students have a more caring and active role in their learning? Well, clearly there's no easy answer here, right? No single answer, that's for sure. What would you do? Obviously I can't hear your ideas, but let me share a suggestion. First of all, imagine what the challenge of cartography actually is. Here's a definition. Okay, I got that from the Wikipedia. I think it's a helpful definition. And what a superb design challenge, if ever I heard one. Let's get the children involved in the problem of doing what cartographers want to do. Let's see what they can do when they have to build a model that communicates effectively certain topographical features, like the ones shown in the slideshow and in their booklets. Alright, I know what you're saying. You say, yeah, alright, this may sound like a cool thing to do, but it's very time consuming. You know, there's a lot of other things we've got to cover in the curriculum, Jed. Yep, I know, fair enough. I get the reality of many of our classrooms these days. But imagine giving groups of children a bag of resources like the following. So what you see here is a paper bag, and what was inside it has been tipped out. Some string, silky cloth, silver foil, bluish paper, and though it's hard to see from the photo, chunks of styrofoam. By the way, I hate styrofoam. I mean, what do you do with the stuff? You can't recycle it. But anyway, here's a possible use for it. Alright, so get this. The students are in groups, okay, and they each have their booklets of topographical features. Maybe they were shown the images on the slideshow. And if they were, it was a very rapid affair, and they were told that they were going to need this information for a design challenge that they would be doing in a few minutes. Okay, so each group gets a paper bag filled with the same selection of the bits and pieces shown here. Get where I'm going with this? Design challenge. They have only so much time, clock is ticking, to make a model of a valley, some hills and a river. The clock is ticking. Valley, some hills and a river. Go! And then after an allotted time, stop. And yes, it's assessment time. Alright, no one is to touch their models. Sit down, arms folded. One group's going to be assessed. Right, everybody come over here, crowd around one of the tables, and the teacher starts asking them if they can see if this model depicts a valley, some hills and a river. Let's hear from the group who made it. How did they come up with this? Oh, the string was the river. Clever. Yeah. Now, was the string in the valley? Yeah. Well, where else could it have been? Maybe coming down the hill? Maybe the valley floor has a slope, so the river will be flowing What direction would the river be flowing? Where's the river going? Right, could we represent that? Maybe it becomes a delta as it feeds into the sea. So all this, you get it, is a chance to talk about the interrelationship between the topographical features and how they could be modelled with the given materials. Pieces of styrofoam, bits of string, silky cloth, silver foil and coloured paper are now the raw materials for developing a symbolic language for representing. And what else could be represented? Well, lagoons, deltas, waterfalls, beaches and so forth. In minutes the children are designing and talking in their groups about solving the design challenges. Maybe they could make 4 or 5 models and have a few of them peer assessed. Could a group design a model that has 6 topographical features? And could another group look at it and identify those 6 features? That's a challenge. Perhaps the names of topographical features are written on little pieces of cardboard. Yeah, and another challenge then is to correctly label your model with these labels. Hey, those booklets are coming in handy after all. And you might ask, okay, wait a minute. How can a piece of string look like a waterfall? Well, it's not meant to, is it? It's not meant to look exactly like a waterfall so much as represent one. And of course, some imagination is what you need. With imagination, a chunk of styrofoam can look like a cliff face. A piece of silver foil can be a lake. It's not a problem. And anyway, we're not making permanent works of art here. We're sketching designs, right? Alright, well, what else can we do with this? How can we make language even more of a focus? Well, here's a possible elaboration. This is little guy. So imagine then that every group has their own little person and they can call he or she whatever they want. But for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to call him little guy. And little guy is going to go on an adventure. Well, you can see what you could do here, can't you? Little guy stood on top of the hill, looking down into the valley. He started to run down the hill. When he got to the bottom, he started to walk towards the waterfall. He sat by the cool river and decided to follow it. The river flowed towards the lake and branched into a delta. Little guy followed the river all the way to the beach. So as I say things like this, I'm having the class in their groups act out the words with their little guy on their own model. And of course, we're having little guy's journey described in ways that involve reference to some of the technical vocabulary we want the students to use and represent on their models. And also notice these constructions, spatial references, prepositions and the like. Such wordings to do with spatial reference are going to also be up on the wall because I'm going to create what I call a smart word wall. Smart, why a smart word wall? Smart because the collection is based on wordings that students are actually going to use in their next design challenge, right? So they're going to use these things. The other reason why it's a smart word wall is that the words are organized according to function. So all these particular wordings, the wordings in blue, have a similar kind of linguistic function. These prepositional phrases give us spatial information, don't they? On top of the hill, into the valley, down the side, along the path, besides the river, behind the rock, inside the cave, out of the river. So in their groups, they're going to construct their own little guy wanderings, perhaps orally several times. And then 1 or 2 of these may get written up. Or perhaps they're not ready for this yet, and the teacher does more jointly constructed examples with them first, showing how she uses the smart word wall. And how about this for an idea? The adventures of little guy. The journeys of little guy become more like adventures and have to incorporate constructions such as tangled in a bush. Poor old little guy, he gets tangled in a bush. He gets lost in a forest. He gets tired from climbing a steep hill. Tangled, lost, tired. What other material processes could we have? Or perhaps little guy buries some treasure. That could be marked with an X on the student's model. Starting at the top of the hill, perhaps we could describe how to get to the treasure once we decide what is north and south and learn something about compass points. Go down the hill until you are north of the lake and stop when you are at the mouth of the river. After following such directions, you finally get to where the treasure is, in the cave under the bluff. Okay, now I know that these last ideas are just mere sketches of lessons, but hopefully you can at least appreciate that the idea here is to design a lesson, an opportunity, a space if you like, for children that maximizes their designing opportunities. In the Killer Lesson Free Zone, we try to create spaces where children can take on the mantle of being designers charged with the responsibility of making something that works and has some recognizable function, whether that be representing topographical features on a model that can be named and identified by others, or describing a walk across a fantasy landscape, or creating written directions to hidden treasures, and on and on and on. Okay, a second pedagogical principle is our responsibility as teachers to provide linguistically informed scaffoldings and language resources that can be used immediately in the service of making something that means. Of course, in considering our initial question, which was, what kinds of spaces do we provide for our students? There are other important things to consider, of course, like the quality of the relationships we foster with our children. But I hope you'll agree that creating opportunities for children to take on the mantle of being designers in a social environment that values sharing and collaboration is also an important way of trying to establish a killer lesson-free zone. All right, anyway, love to hear what you think about all of this. And as always, thank you for watching. Take care.